The alien death god has spared my life. Now she won't leave my side. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Liam Grayson had made peace with the fact that he was about to die. His knees ached against the cold stone floor, his wrists bound with thick alien-forged metal, and his head throbbed from the blow that had knocked him unconscious hours ago. The air inside the temple was thick with incense and smoke from burning torches, and the rhythmic chanting of the alien warriors echoed in his skull like a funeral dirge. They were calling for blood, his blood, and no amount of reasoning or struggling was going to change that. The KRA were infamous across the galaxy for their devotion to ritual slaughter. They didn't take prisoners, they didn't negotiate. Their enemies were either cut down in battle or offered as tribute to their living goddess. He had seen the aftermath of their raids, the skulls stacked like trophies, the banners soaked in the blood of those who dared to challenge them. And now he was here, kneeling before the being responsible for it all, the death goddess herself, Vexa. She sat upon an elevated throne of jagged obsidian, watching him with an expression as unreadable as the depths of space. Her crimson skin glowed under the flickering torch light, her powerful frame draped in dark ceremonial armor, and her piercing golden eyes locked onto him like a predator sizing up its prey. At her side, her bladed tail rested against the stone, a deadly weapon that had executed thousands without hesitation. The temple doors slammed shut behind him, and Liam clenched his jaw. He wasn't religious, but if there was ever a time for a miracle, this was it. The warriors flanking him barked something in their guttural language, and one of them yanked him forward, forcing him to kneel even lower. The high priest, his face covered in ritual markings, stepped forward and spoke in heavily accented galactic standard. This human has defied the Krath dominion, trespassed upon our holy grounds, and insulted our warriors by divine law. He must be offered to the goddess of death. Liam exhaled through his nose. Trespassed? That was a bit of a stretch. He had been captured, not wandering through their holy lands like some clueless tourist. He didn't even know how they had found his ship. One moment he was making a quiet landing to repair his engine, the next his cockpit was torn open, and he was being dragged out like a prize kill. He had no allegiance to the Cath's enemies, no interest in their politics, but none of that mattered now. These people didn't deal in logic. The warriors roared their approval, stomping their feet, the sound vibrating through his ribs. The priest raised his hands toward the throne, awaiting the verdict. Great Vexa, how shall this offering be accepted? The throne creaked as she rose. Liam forced himself not to flinch as she stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her bladed tail scraping lightly against the stone. As she descended toward him, her presence was suffocating, her aura one of pure dominance, a force of nature that demanded submission. He had seen aliens larger than her, stronger than her, but none as commanding. The warriors around him lowered their heads as she passed, the air growing heavier with every step. Then she stopped, towering over him, studying him with those inhuman eyes. Her silence stretched unbearably long, and Liam knew better than to speak first. If this was his last moment, he wasn't going to waste it begging for mercy. It wouldn't come. He held her gaze, refusing to break, refusing to crumble like the warriors expected him to. Maybe that was stupid, maybe that was exactly what got people killed, but he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching him beg. Vexa tilted her head slightly, a flicker of something crossing her face, amusement, curiosity, he couldn't tell. Then, without looking away, she reached out and grasped his chin, her grip like iron, as she forced his head to tilt further as if inspecting something. No one else could see. His pulse pounded in his ears, but he didn't dare move. The warriors had gone silent. Even the priests seemed tense, waiting. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was deep, smooth, commanding, and absolute. No, the priest hesitated. Goddess. She released Liam's chin, turning to face the gathered warriors, her posture unwavering, her tone brooking no argument. I will not take this one's life. The entire temple erupted into chaos. Warriors snarled and shouted, some looking outright offended, others confused. The priest's eyes widened in horror. But Great Vexa, the rights I know. The rights. She cut him off. Her tail flicked, the blade at its tip gleaming under the temple's torches. And I invoke my right to claim instead of kill. Liam's stomach dropped. Claim the priest. Hesitated it again. You mean to take him as a servant? Vexa turned to him, and something about the way she watched him unsettled him more than the idea of execution ever did. No, she said slowly, deliberately, I want this one. The noise stopped instantly. No one spoke, no one moved. It was as if the entire temple had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Liam felt the weight of every single stare, but none of them were as heavy as hers. He swallowed. I don't think I like what that means, he muttered under his breath. The nearest warrior hissed and slammed the hilt of his blade into Liam's side, knocking the air from his lungs. He barely had time to recover before Vex's tail snapped out faster than lightning, stopping just short of impaling the warrior's throat. The warrior froze, his body trembling. The message was clear. Touch him again, and you die. Vexa didn't even glance at the warrior as she pulled her tail back, instead keeping her focus on Liam. He will come with me, she declared, turning toward the exit. Prepare his chambers. Liam barely had time to process the insanity of what just happened before he was yanked to his feet, his restraints removed and escorted, not as a prisoner, but as something far stranger. And as he followed her through the towering stone corridors, under the watchful gazes of warriors who had just moments ago demanded his death, Liam had only one thought running through his head. What the hell did I just get myself into? The moment Liam was hauled out of the temple and shoved down the stone corridors, he knew he had traded one type of death sentence for another. The warriors guiding him were silent, their grip firm, but not rough, yet the tension in the air was suffocating. He wasn't sure if it was because they feared Vex's wrath, or if they simply didn't know what to do with a human who had just been claimed by their death goddess. Either way, they didn't meet his gaze, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge him. Beyond keeping him moving toward whatever fate awaited him, he was taken deeper into the temple, past towering stone walls etched with the history of the craft, past braziers burning with thick, pungent incense, past rows of kneeling acolytes who whispered low prayers. As he passed, the weight of it all pressed down on him, the realization that he was the only human here, an outsider wrapped in a culture that saw him as nothing more than a relic to be sacrificed. Except now, he wasn't a sacrifice. He was something else. When the warriors finally stopped, it wasn't before a prison cell or a torture chamber. It was before a massive set of doors, intricately carved with swirling designs that depicted battle-scenes, celestial bodies, and something that looked like an ancient prophecy woven between the lines. The warriors hesitated for only a moment before pushing the heavy doors open, revealing a chamber unlike anything Liam had expected. It wasn't a dungeon, nor was it a battlefield. It was a throne room and personal quarters fused into one, an enormous space with towering pillars, dark stone walls lined with furs and banners, and a central fire pit that cast flickering light over everything. At the far end of the room, past weapon racks and ancient artifacts, stood a raised platform with a massive bed draped in deep crimson fabric. Vexa stood at the center of it all, her back to him, her gaze locked on a large curved blade resting on an altar. She wasn't wearing the ceremonial armor from before. Instead, she was dressed in something lighter, a loose wrap draped over her powerful frame, her bladed tail curling slightly. As she traced a finger over the weapon's edge, the warriors behind him bowed their heads in silent respect before stepping away, leaving Liam standing there alone with her. The silence stretched. He could hear the crackling of the fire, the distant hum of chanting from deeper within the temple, the slow, steady breath of the woman who had just turned his entire world upside down. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, even carrying the weight of command. You are afraid? Liam let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. That obvious? She turned, her golden eyes locking onto his, and for the first time, he saw something beyond just cold calculation. There was curiosity there, something sharp and unreadable, something that made the feel heavier between them. Your kind fears death, that is natural, but you were prepared to face it without begging. She stepped closer, moving with the quiet grace of a predator. That is why I chose you. He swallowed hard, resisting the urge to step back. Yeah. Well, you didn't exactly give me a choice. Her tail flicked, the blade glinting in the firelight. You would rather be dead. Liam hesitated, his mind racing. He had thought so back when he was on his knees in the temple waiting for the killing blow, but now he was alive, standing in a place where no other human had ever stood, faced with a woman who was both feared and worshipped in equal measure. He didn't know what she wanted from him, and that uncertainty made his skin crawl. Surprisingly good, rich, heavily seasoned, unlike anything he had tasted before. He was halfway through the meat when the door opened again. This time, it wasn't a quiet servant. It was Vexa. She stepped inside without preamble, without hesitation, as if she owned the space, which in a way she did. She was clad in a different set of armor today, lighter, more practical, but just as imposing. Her golden eyes swept over him, taking in the remnants of his meal, the way he was still seated, his posture neither submissive nor aggressive. If she was expecting gratitude, she didn't get it. "You ate," she observed. Liam wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Yes, starvation didn't seem like a better alternative. She moved closer, stopping just a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest. "You slept not much." Vexa studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward the door. "Come." Liam didn't move. "Come," where a flicker of amusement passed through her eyes, gone as quickly as it had appeared. "You wish to know what happens next? Now you will see." There was no point in arguing. "Not yet, anyway." Liam exhaled sharply, pushed himself up from the bed, and followed her out of the room. The two guards outside fell in step behind them, but not in a way that suggested they expected him to run. No, they were escorting him as if he were something valuable. Vexa led him through the winding corridors of the temple, past more warriors, past intricate carvings depicting past battles and triumphs. Every kra they passed bowed their heads slightly as Vexa passed, but their gazes flickered toward Liam with curiosity, with awe, with something that made him uneasy. He wasn't just a prisoner, wasn't just a pet. He was something more in their eyes, something he didn't understand yet. They entered a vast chamber, an open training ground, where warriors sparred in tight, disciplined formations. The scent of sweat and iron filled the air, the sound of clashing weapons ringing through the space. As they stepped onto the sand-covered floor, conversations halted, all eyes turned to them. Vexa gestured toward the warriors. "This is the heart of the Kra Dominion. Strength is our law, power determines fate." She turned her gaze back to him. "You are an outsider, yet you were claimed by me. That alone places you above them." Liam stiffened. "I didn't ask to be placed anywhere." Her tail flicked the blade at its tip, twitching slightly perhaps, "but now you must prove whether you are worthy of it." A massive Kra warrior stepped forward. He was at least 7 feet tall, heavily armored, and radiated pure hostility. His gaze burned into Liam like he was a disease that needed to be eradicated. "This one is weak," the warrior spat. "He is not fit to stand beside you." Liam wasn't stupid. He knew exactly where this was going. Vexa tilted her head slightly, then looked at Liam. "Show them. Otherwise," he exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. "Right. And if I do," the warrior bared his teeth, "then I will break you." Liam really hated how predictable this was. He turned to Vexa. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" She didn't smile, but there was something in her eyes that told him she wasn't entirely neutral about the situation. "You wish to understand your place. This is how it is determined." Liam muttered a curse under his breath, but stepped forward anyway. The circle widened around them. The warrior was already drawing his blade, already positioning himself like he was eager to rip Liam apart. Liam didn't have a weapon, he didn't have armor, hell, he didn't even have a plan, but he did have survival instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming at him to move. The warrior lunged. Liam barely dodged, throwing himself to the side as the blade whistled past his ribs, missing by inches. The crowd outroared. The fight had begun. Liam didn't wait. He didn't have the brute strength of the Krath, but he had speed, he had adaptability, and most importantly, he had desperation. He ducked under the next strike, rolled across the sand, and kicked up a cloud of dust toward the warrior's face. It barely stalled him, but it was enough for Liam to get behind him, to grab the knife tucked into the warrior's belt. The moment the blade was in his hand, the warrior pivoted faster than Liam did, slamming into him with enough force to knock the air from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, the knife slipping from his grasp, and the warrior was already on top of him, already raising his blade for a finishing blow, until Vex's tail shot Forward like lightning, the bladed tip stopping mere inches from the warrior's exposed throat. The entire arena fell. Silent Vexa's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the command in it. Enough. The warrior froze, his breathing ragged, his frustration palpable. Then slowly he pulled back, stepping away. Accepting his loss, Liam gasped for air, still half sprawled in the sand, and when he looked up, Vexa was watching him with something new in her expression, something satisfied. She turned to the crowd. He does not yield, that is enough. Liam wasn't sure if he had just won something, or if he had just stepped into an even bigger trap. Liam sat on the edge of a stone bench, still catching his breath, his ribs aching from where the warrior had slammed into him. The crowd had dispersed, the tension in the air shifting into something strange, something heavier. The warriors had watched him fight, had seen him refuse to back down, and now they were looking at him differently, not as an outsider, not as a weak human, but as something else. He didn't know if that was good or bad. Vexa stood a few feet away, speaking in hushed tones with the warrior who had nearly killed him. Liam couldn't make out their words, but he didn't need to. The body language said it all. She was satisfied the warrior was. She had done that on purpose. The whole thing, the fight, the challenge, was a test, and Liam had passed. His hands curled into fists as frustration flared in his chest. He was playing her game without even knowing the rules. He had wanted to understand what she wanted from him, but now that he was starting to see it, it didn't make him feel any better. The warrior stormed off, his expression unreadable, and Vexa finally turned back to him, her golden eyes flicked over him. Assessing, measuring. You are injured. Liam let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, well, getting tackled by a 7-foot alien will do that to you. She didn't react to his sarcasm. Instead, she took a step closer, gesturing for him to stand. Come, he exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. What now, another fight, or am I finally going to get some answers? You will be treated. That was unexpected. He hesitated before pushing himself up, his body protesting the movement. She didn't wait for him to recover. She simply turned and started walking, fully expecting him to follow. He did, because what other choice did he have? They moved through the temple halls again, the stone beneath his feet colder than before. He noticed the way warriors and attendants stepped aside as they passed, the way their eyes lingered on him, not with disdain but with something closer to respect. It unsettled him. Just a few hours ago, they had wanted his blood spilled on their sacred floors. Now they were acknowledging him. Vexa led him through a set of carved doors into a chamber that smelled of herbs and smoke. A healer was already waiting, an older craftwoman with deep-set eyes and markings along her arms. She didn't speak as she gestured for Liam to sit on a stone platform, already reaching for a set of glass vials filled with something thick and dark. Liam eyed the vials warily. That's not poison, right? The healer shot him a flat look, then turned to Vexa. He speaks too much. Vexa's lips twitched. He is human, the healer huffed, then grabbed his arm, inspecting the bruises forming along his ribs. Her touch was firm, clinical, not unkind, but not gentle either. She pressed against a particularly sore spot, and Liam hissed through his teeth, nothing broken. She muttered, bruising. He will recover. That's good news, Liam said, but if you're offering painkillers, I won't say no. The healer ignored him instead, dipping her fingers into one of the vials and smearing a cool, tingling substance along his skin. Almost immediately, the pain diminished, replaced by a numbing sensation that spread through his muscles. Liam blinked. Okay, I take it back. That's actually nice. Vexa watched the process in silence, her expression unreadable. When the healer finished, she stepped back and nodded. He is healed. Vexa turned to Liam. You will rest? Liam scoffed. Rest? After that, I think I deserve a few explanations first. Vexa regarded him for a long moment before nodding slightly. Walk with me. He followed her out of the healer's chamber, the scent of herbs still clinging to his skin. They moved through the temple again, but this time she took him higher up a set of spiral stairs that led to an open balcony overlooking the mountains. The view was breathtaking, a sea of jagged peak stretching under an alien sky. The air crisp and sharp with the scent of rain. Vexa leaned against the stone railing, gazing out at the horizon. You are confused? Liam crossed his arms. Understatement of the year. She exhaled, tilting her head slightly. The car wrath. Do not claim without purpose. You have been marked by me, and in doing so you have been placed above others. That is why they challenged you. They needed to see if you were worthy of that status. He narrowed his eyes. And what happens if I'm not? She turned to face him, fully her golden gaze intense. Then you die. His stomach tightened, but he forced himself to hold her gaze, so that fight wasn't just a test, it was a warning, a trial. She corrected, you are still an outsider, but now you are one with my mark. They will not challenge you so freely again. He let out a slow breath, processing that. So what does that actually mean? What am I to you? She was silent for a moment, as if considering her words carefully. Then finally she said, you are mine. Liam's pulse jumped. The way she said it, it wasn't possessive, but it was absolute. He shook his head. That's not an answer. Vexa stepped closer, her tail licking behind her. You are under my protection. That is more than most receive, but it is also a challenge. A challenge you must decide if you will embrace it or resist it. Liam exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. And what happens if I resist? Her lips quirked slightly. You have already seen the answer to that. He looked out over the mountains, his mind racing. He had survived execution, survived a warrior's challenge, and now he was standing here, caught between being a prisoner and being something else entirely. He didn't know what Vexa saw in him, didn't know why she had chosen him instead of killing him, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized something she didn't fully know either. Liam let out a slow breath. All right, I'll play along for now. Vexa studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. And for the first time since he had arrived, he wasn't sure if she meant that as a command or as something else entirely. Liam had agreed to play along, but the reality of that choice settled uncomfortably in his chest as the day stretched on. He wasn't a prisoner, not exactly, but he wasn't free either. The temple was vast, filled with winding corridors, high stone walls etched with battle histories, and warriors who watched him with weary respect. No one touched him, no one spoke out of turn. The moment Vexa had marked him, he had become something untouchable, but that only made it harder to figure out his place. Every morning food was brought to him without a word. Every day he was given the freedom to roam within the temple's grounds, but every path led him back to the same realization: he had nowhere else to go. The mountains surrounding the temple were treacherous, and even if he somehow made it past the Cath warriors who patrolled the perimeter, there was no ship, no allies, no way off this world. And then there was Vexa. She was everywhere, not hovering, not openly controlling his movements, but always present. Sometimes he caught her watching from a distance as he walked the halls, speaking in hushed tones with her warriors. Other times she would summon him to stand beside her during council meetings, her warriors clearly uncomfortable with his presence, but too fearful to object. She never explained why he was there, never offered him a clear reason for keeping him so close, but every time he thought about trying to escape, she would look at him, not with cruelty, not with malice, but with something deeper, something unreadable. He hated that it unnerved him more than outright threats ever could. On the fourth evening since his so-called claiming, she summoned him again. This time it wasn't to council meeting, nor was it to the training grounds. He was led by one of her attendants, one of the few KRA who didn't look at him like an anomaly, to a dimly lit chamber deep beneath the temple. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the only sound was the faint crackling of torches lining the walls. It was a ritual chamber. Ancient symbols carved into the stone floor, a basin filled with shimmering liquid at its center. Vexa stood at the far end of the room, dressed in something simpler than her usual armor, her crimson skin illuminated by the glow of the torches. She was holding a curved ceremonial blade, her expression unreadable. Liam stopped just short of stepping onto the marked floor. Okay, I don't like this already. The attendant who had brought him boded and quickly left the heavy door, shutting behind them, sealing them in. Vexa turned to face him, fully, her golden eyes flickering in the firelight. You are restless. Liam crossed his arms. You dragged me into a secret chamber with a knife. Yeah, I'd say I'm a little on edge. Her lips twitched slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. This is an initiation that didn't make him feel any better. He exhaled, glancing at the markings on the floor, into what she stepped closer, holding the blade with reverence. The Cath do not take oaths lightly. To fight beside another, to claim another, is to take responsibility for their existence. His stomach twisted, And you're telling me this? Why? She extended the blade toward him, not as a threat but as an offering, because you must decide whether you will accept that bond. Liam stared at the weapon, his pulse pounding. He wasn't stupid. He knew what this meant. If he accepted, he would be bound to her people, to this life, not as a prisoner, but as something more permanent. And if he